suit up. Boots on the ground, okay? Not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations. This is exactly what I said was gonna fucking come when we didn't fucking go and march on fucking Whipple with guns.
So I'm happy to report today that at least some of the left-wing lunatics who have been threatening ICE, engaging in violence, and operating a domestic terror network on the streets of Minnesota are finally starting to get arrested. Don't get me wrong, this is not nearly enough. It needs to go a lot further, but I guess you have to start somewhere. And let me remind people that this is actually the peaceful solution to the situation, is that the people who are breaking the law simply have to go to jail. Because I've heard a lot of calls, even from right-wingers as of late, that what's going on in Minneapolis is bad optics and we need to find a way to de-escalate the situation, to which I say, I actually agree with that. It's not a good look, and it's not something I want to see happening repeatedly every single week. But in order to de-escalate, we have to be honest about why it's happening to begin with. And that's not because ICE and Border Patrol are doing the same job they've been doing for the past 20 years. No, rather, in every single one of these cases, including the high-profile ones that made national news, it is leftists entirely who are provoking these situations to begin with. They are the ones engaging in violence, refusing law enforcement orders, and in most cases, illegally impeding federal law enforcement operations, which is a crime. And in order for that to stop, and in order for the potentially dangerous situations that very much can ensue, and you've seen that happen, to prevent that from happening, then the federal government needs to make it explicitly clear that actually we are going to enforce the law. Actually, you're not allowed to impede ICE. You're not allowed to operate domestic terror networks that are meant to stalk and harass them and free criminals from arrest every single time. And if you do that, we are going to arrest you on the spot and charge you federally. There's going to be no more of this, we're just going to shove you out the way, or maybe spray a little bit of mace or tear gas, but in the end, essentially let you go and then, feel free to come back and protest the very next week. No, you're going to jail. Which is precisely why I'm very happy to report to you today that at least one of these characters by the name of ANTIFA Kyle, an individual who is allegedly heavily involved in the organized anti-ICE agitation, he was seen on social media openly calling for people to dox, assault, and even take the lives of ICE agents, so making violent threats, although he's far from alone, finally saw one of these characters get arrested, not by local police who are going to slap him on the wrist, but rather federal charges, and I'm certainly hoping this is the start of a much wider precedent that actually this stuff is not okay. Okay, and it's going to be prosecuted, and the people who are engaged in the violence are going to go to jail. And by the way, that's the only way you stop it. Is you have to, actually enforce the legal consequences against these people. It doesn't matter how many compromises you attempt to make with Democrats in Washington, D.C., for example. Doesn't matter if you try to downscale the presence of federal agents in a certain liberal city. They're still going to get up to the same exact behavior because they're lunatics, they are deranged, they are violent, which is precisely why these types of people belong in prison. Nonetheless, let's tell you all about it here today, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let us introduce you to this brand new story of ANTIFA Kyle by simply showing you the now infamous video that he posted on social media as it pertains to ICE, warning some of the content here may be graphic, offensive. We might have to censor it for certain YouTube guidelines, but you'll basically get the idea here of what's being said. Take a listen.
My name is Kyle. I'm Antifa, and there's so much rage in me that I've had to record this like 15 times trying to get the message out. They f***ed up. Okay, go watch my other videos. Doesn't matter if you're not here and you're not caught up. You missed the fight. But if you are, it's time to suit up. Boots on the ground. Nicollet and 26th. My house is 4 blocks away. Anywhere between Franklin and Nicollet and 26th and Nicollet. Show up, ready to go. Okay, not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore. I am talking specifically to my followers. This is everything I have talked about, and this is exactly what I said was going to happen. This is exactly what I said was going to come when we didn't go and march on Whipple with guns. Sorry, but welcome to America 2026, where Second Amendment is the only thing that's going to keep you fucking protected from literal fucking Nazi gunmen that are killing innocent people in the street with impunity. This is not a fucking joke. There's nothing fun to chant about it. Get your fucking guns and stop these fucking people.
Yeah, well, this is really not a hard case to make at all. You're talking about someone who pretty explicitly made violent terroristic threats against the federal government. And by the way, I'd like to add, it's just not all that smart to, first of all, show his face, attach his identity to the entire thing, but even go so far as to publicly state where he lives while he's trying to organize a violent protest, apparently with guns, right? It's not peaceful. We're not chanting anymore out in the streets of Minneapolis. Yeah, just not all that good of an idea. But unfortunately, we have seen people who have done similar things thus far get off the hook for it, which is exactly why I think it is important to point out that here's the news story. Federal authorities have now arrested the self-described Antifa member in Minnesota on Thursday after he racked up a significant social media following that the government says was used to obstruct federal law enforcement and threaten to kill ICE agents. Well, we saw that evidence pretty clearly on video. But I'd like to point out as well, notice how, I don't know how many followers this guy had before he deleted his account, but they're describing it as a significant social media following. What does that mean? And a point I try to make very often, I said it a lot in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination because you could see it on social media and in some cases in real life. When we talk about the left-wing violence problem in our country, okay, it's not just an issue of a few bad apples. We're not talking about, oh, you know, there's a couple crazed lunatics out there, but they don't represent any wide swaths of the Democrat voter base. No, actually they do, right? We've seen by polls, for instance, how a slight majority of Democrat voters explicitly say they would support political assassinations and political violence. You can see that on social media as people cheer time and time again for that type of stuff to happen. There's a reason why this guy had such a following. And by the way, there's a reason why they're managing to pull so many violent people to go out in the streets and commit violence. Sure, you could argue that they're organized or paid agitators, but you still have to be pretty crazy to even engage in that type of behavior to begin with. So just want to point that out, right? Democrats can go out there and constantly claim, oh, you know, our voters are such amazing people. They have empathy, they have compassion, and they're just peaceful hippies who love the flowers. But the evidence seems to show the opposite, right? How Antifa Kyle feels is how publicly or privately many Democrat voters out there feel. I'm not saying all of them, but I am saying basically 50% or more of them, actually, as a matter of fact, when we've shown you the poll data that backs that type of stuff up, right? The concept, the mainstreaming of political violence is extremely widespread among the left-wing voter base. It's just a simple reality. It's highly concerning, but it's something that we shouldn't sit here and try to lie about. Oh, he was just a bad apple. No. This guy had followers for a reason as he's making his explicitly violent calls. So just keep that in mind, right? Anyways, in a video obtained by Fox News Digital, Kyle Wagner, 37, of Minneapolis, was arrested in the early morning hours wearing a sweatshirt that said, "I'm Antifa," in a reference to the far-left organization that the Trump administration has deemed a domestic terrorist group. Wagner's bald head and numerous tattoos, including the word resistance across his chest. Yeah, this guy really took it to heart. What a lunatic. And the 3 arrows anti-fascist symbol on his neck have made him a recognizable figure on anti-ICE social media feeds. And by the way, I seriously doubt it made him all that hard to find either. Wagner apparently operated an Instagram account under this handle where he had amassed tens of thousands of followers before the account was deleted for making those very violent threats. So as you can see, this type of content is popular. It absolutely sells. Not just on social media, but we see it happen in the real world as well, right? In his bio, he reportedly used the hashtag Iron Front and described himself as an entrepreneur while claiming to be a communist. That's pretty interesting. But anyways, on that channel, the DOJ said that Wagner had urged followers to confront and attack ICE agents, referring to them as murderers and the Nazi Gestapo, and at times called for armed violence against them. We showed you the video that was posted on January 8th of 2026. Now, it's unclear whether Wagner was employed. I doubt he was, or attended any schools, but he spoke of himself as a longtime fixture in the city, stating, quote, "I've already bled for this city. I've already fought for this city." which likely is probably an admission that either he engaged in anti-ICE agitation before, or very likely that he was too involved in the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020. And according to him, he bled. So in other words, he engaged in violence. To which I have to say, here's another case of someone. You want to talk about the repeat offender problem, right? It doesn't just apply to random schizophrenics who are attacking people on subways. It also, frankly, applies to the left-wing domestic terrorist problem. These are people who should have been locked up a very long time ago, right? He should have never even had to have this dramatic manhunt in 2026, because likely back in 2020 or whenever he was quote-unquote bleeding for the city, there should have been actual consequences. But clearly, because that's not the case, here he was amassing tens of thousands of followers and helping to incite the situation in Minnesota alongside many of his, Democrat politicians who are backing people like this. So Fox News Digital had previously reported that Wagner was on the run. So this guy was a fugitive from justice and removed his remaining social media accounts last week, while a Venmo account linked to his donations was no longer accessible. So apparently the feds in the end ended up finding this guy, but he said, quote, "I'm basically on the run now. I have safe places, I have evacuations planned out, but the way things are going, I'm going to have to be very resourceful, and that's going to take support," Wagner said. "As I said a million times, I'm going to stay in this fight till the bitter end. I'm not going to run away, but I will need some help." So it's unclear whether he was attempting to flee to, let's say, a compound in Pakistan, a cave in Afghanistan, or a bunker in Berlin or something, but in the end, it turns out the feds indeed found this guy. Take a look. Yeah, well, a couple things you notice. I would say first and foremost how a bunch of left-wingers showed up to protest in his defense, which means what? They are defending someone they see as their comrade. Why? Because they feel this exact same way as Mr. Antifa Kyle over here, right? Again, he's not all that isolated. And secondly, it further begs the question, how did these leftists know where federal agents were even going to be or where Kyle was hiding out? Does likely also seem to suggest that, they're probably in on the same exact network of domestic terror that Kyle is involved in, which means further, you're dealing here with co-conspirators. And maybe the solution, seeing them in the street, should be a lot more than just to walk past them. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to share with you some of these final details. So Wagner had acknowledged in a video posted in late January that he cannot legally possess a firearm, though he did not specify the legal reason for this restriction. So likely one of two things. He's already a felon, or he's severely mentally ill. Maybe a little bit of both, which would explain his Antifa politics. It's very in character, average leftist in the United States of America, just saying. But anyways, following the fatal law enforcement shooting of Alex Preddy, Wagner reportedly told followers that he was not talking about peaceful protests and urged them to get your effing guns and stop these effing people. In the press release, the Department of Justice says Wagner is facing federal threat and cyber stalking charges following the alleged murder and assault threats against ICE. This man allegedly doxed and called for the murder of law enforcement officers, encouraged bloodshed in the streets, and proudly claimed affiliation with the terrorist organization Antifa before going on the run. Today's arrest illustrates that you cannot run, you cannot hide, and you cannot evade federal law enforcement or our federal agents. So there you have it. Quite an image too here, by the way. But on that front, as I've been hinting about, I'd like to show you actually this brand new Fox News exclusive that kind of helps to highlight the actual situation with these so-called underground anti-ICE networks that you're seeing out of Minneapolis. Because if you've been maybe asking yourself the question, how is it that the moment ICE shows up anywhere in Minneapolis, you already get a scene of dozens to hundreds of leftists immediately swarming them, already knowing where to go, already impeding them, basically having this coordinated effort of we're going to try to intimidate ICE and ultimately we're going to impede the operation in order to free whatever criminal illegal alien they're chasing? Well, take a look at this. So inside the underground anti-ICE network that is using military tactics against the feds, Fox News has uncovered a shadow of a shadow network of anti-ICE scouts that are going around tracking law enforcement across 13 databases in a surveillance operation that a retired Green Beret is warning is dangerous. The tactics include size, activity, location, uniform, time, and equipment. Activists are being trained in this salute method, a military-grade intelligence framework used by soldiers to track enemies in combat. So, again, Democrats try to sell us this image that, well, this is just ordinary residents that are showing up to protest outside of any and every single ICE operation. Clearly, we've always known that's not true. We know that powerful dark money networks on the left wing are sponsoring these very people and encouraging them to engage in their agitation, engage in their violence. And here's just more proof of that. We recently had the Signal chat scandal just a couple weeks ago that further showed people being able to infiltrate these networks and showing you just how elaborate they were and how even some statewide politicians were loosely affiliated with them. Yeah, this stuff goes deep, and yes, a lot of the funding here can be traced and tied back directly to the Democrat Party itself, so don't let them ever tell you that they're not affiliated with this type of stuff. Dark money and Marxist manifestos. Follow the money. Groups like States at the Core are funded by the Hopewell Fund, a massive Democrat-aligned dark money organization. You don't say. Really? So you mean to tell me the same money and financial sources that are funding the Democrat Party are funding the domestic terrorism on our streets? Which, according to Democrats, is just totally organic citizen activism. Yeah, not surprising. The training, though. Recruiters are sharing the mini manual of the Urban Guerrilla, a Marxist manifesto that suggests using lethal weapons and street tactics to wage a, quote, revolutionary struggle against the United States. Well, that is terrorism. That is a terrorist organization operating here. And frankly, all of the funders of it, all of those engaged directly, all the people you're seeing in the streets that are connected to any of this, ought to be arrested under conspiracy charges linked to terrorism. And don't get me wrong, I understand that some of these legal cases can be difficult because we have, of course, seen the way our own judiciary treats us, right? The woke judge problem certainly runs very deep. And, when some people ask, oh, why haven't more people been arrested? I mean, there's your answer. But I'm going to be completely honest with you, right? If our justice system can figure out a way to bring charges against people from January 6th that simply walked into the Capitol after they were allowed to go inside the building and did nothing else and still did multiple years in prison, look, there's got to be some way, right? Some legal pretense you can use to justify, hey, these people are impeding federal law enforcement. They're also engaged in terroristic networks. We're going to arrest, charge, and convict them, okay? I understand it's different. I understand they're not the same thing because obviously our judicial system is rigged against right-wingers and rigged in favor of left-wingers, and that's why all these people act with impunity. You wonder why the left never receives consequences for their actions. That is the reason. But just some things to consider here, right? When you realize how deep this goes, and yeah, like I've been saying, right, it's not a conspiracy. This is a network of domestic terrorism. The answer at this point is something has to be done about it, right? And not just people who are engaged directly or the most obvious cases. No, you also have to bring conspiracy charges against those who are involved and connected and the whole web of people organizing this stuff. So the numbers include 5,000 records have been collected thus far, 200 plus anti-ICE organizations, 13 sophisticated databases, and 18 hubs nationwide. One activist boasts of training 40,000 quote-unquote rapid responders in just the last year. Yeah, so again, not so organic, is it? This retired Green Beret says what ICE faces in Minnesota is an insurgency. Well, you don't say. If Iraqi resistance ran this level of operation against us, we wouldn't have stayed past 2007, according to him. Now, the FBI has labeled this a, quote, extreme danger to law enforcement. These stakeouts have already turned deadly. The FBI is now officially investigating the use of encrypted apps like Signal to coordinate these drills. The activities of these surveillance networks, the federal government is saying, may potentially violate multiple federal laws, including federal statutes that protect federal agents from threats and stalking, including violations connected to obstructing, striking, or resisting federal agents or felonies. And that's all true. But that's exactly why at a certain point, well, you can read the law, you can make empty threats, but no, at a certain point, something needs to be done about it. Something, legally speaking, has to happen to these people, right? That's the only way. And I will say, I think it's frankly a top responsibility of the Trump administration to ensure that the violent radical left doesn't get its way, because I don't think it's rocket science to have to explain this to people. If these people are not stopped, if the violent domestic terrorists essentially are allowed to take power, then what do you think is going to happen to the country, right? These people essentially have to be disarmed in a legal, peaceful, and patriotic sense, right? But it has to happen right now. This is the moment when you have the power, and if you don't do it and ultimately they find their way to connive their way back into power, then that's going to be an issue of serious concern, right? So act now, you know? You want it to stop, you want it to de-escalate, make this the moment where you say we're standing firm in the sense we're going to enforce the law. Yeah, and we are going to start mass arresting those impeding federal law enforcement, those engaged in domestic terrorism and terroristic threats, and by the way, all the conspirators connected to the whole web of the story, you know? But anyways, that said though, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.